the historical situation that we found ourselves in, and now the new standard wants us to demonstrate that. So essentially, we needed to disengage ourselves now from that traditional thought process and be able now to come up with something that the members of the board and even senior management team will be able to see value. So that is the number two challenge that I see, being marginalized to do mostly the traditional work in the area of assurance and compliance. It kind of again limits the opportunity for us getting involved, and it thinks that it presumably have got a kind of strategic imperatives. So that is the kind of major challenge that I see on this part of the world. I think number three, which again I find it kind of is the talents. If you look at many of the internal auditors in Africa, we seem to be hosting large number of people with the accounting auditing background. I think looking at the bigger picture of many such organizations, it is very clear that the diversity is required. Some new disciplines now are coming, which appear to be quite important, like behavioral science, the data science, data analysis, which again require data experts coming from data science, and that becomes an area that we need to think it seriously when we are trying to deploy talents that are able to fit our strategy into the bigger strategy of the organization. Now, to what extent we have a leeway in that in terms of demanding the kind of a mixture that will be able or will allow us to embark on that kind of a journey, that is kind of discussion that we needed to have today, and to see whether we have got any remedies as internally functioning on this part of the world that we can lead the way and be able really to be of value to the bigger picture in terms of the strategy. So that again is number three that I thought probably we should be kind of discuss when I will give you time to kind of give your comments. And the number four, which again is quite a bit tricky again, I think we have put a lot of technological advancement that are coming on board. Now, fundamental question is on this part of the world, to what extent the auditors are actually getting closer to these major changes that are taking place and embed them into the way we deliver our services. Now, the corporate or our clients, meaning the corporate board that we serve, sometimes they do a lot of investment around technology that can support business. But to what extent are we also in the path of major innovations or innovations so that at least we're able to take up the bigger challenge that our organizations are taking? So again, that puts us in a very disadvantageous when we are actually developing a strategy, and that needed to be addressed when the new standard hit on the ground. Now, those are kind of four major issues that I thought are quite important in terms of the challenge on this part of the world. And if you ask me as Godfrey, do you have an immediate solution? The answer is no. I think that's the reason that we decided to call this webinar and probably see what kind of conversations will go around it, and then we will be able to develop a consensus by the time I get to a conclusion. Let me probably stop here and see whether EJ has joined and see whether he will have one or two things to contribute before we proceed. EJ?
Yes, thank you, Godfrey, for the introduction. So my apologies where I am. My internet is extremely unstable, but I hope you can hear me, so my video will be off. But if there's any issue, Godfrey, feel free to chip in and continue. In case I'm lost, I will always reconnect. But what we are intending to do in the conversation today is part of the series of getting to understand more the strategy. I mean, the new internal auditing standards, but we've decided to start with the strategy because we feel it's a very important topic to be well understood. But also it is something that has never been done before, because in the 2017 IPPF, this standard was not there. There was no requirement for developing internal audit strategy. So this standard number 9 is quite a new one. in terms of other aspects, particularly in developing internal audit strategy. Although some people have been doing it already over a period of time. And so that's where we're going to focus most of our discussion. And we're not intending to make this conversation today as a one-way traffic. We would like to get to hear, from different participants who are in this forum, who have done it before, if you have developed strategy, but if not, then what you need to do to develop the strategy. Because with the adoption of the new standards coming 2025 January, I believe the first thing that you need to have, if you count based on the calendar year, would be your internal audit strategy, because that one will determine the rest of the game. Okay, so what I'm going to do briefly, I'm going to run through some few slides just to get us into context. And I hope, Godfrey, you can confirm to me if you can see the slides. Okay, thank you. So I did a presentation recently, and I was talking about the internal auditor's role in stakeholders engagement. So there were a few things that I discussed in that presentation, and I'm not intending to make this session as part of what I did previously. But what I want to bring it as a preamble to this presentation is the fact that we as internal auditors, we need to understand who are our stakeholders and how should we engage them, or how should we bring them on board. So I believe this is standard number 9 on internal audit strategy is one of the tools that you can build in determining on how you are going to engage with the different stakeholders of internal auditing. Yeah, so in terms of the stakeholders, last time I did the presentation, I said who, what, when, and how. So who are your stakeholders will be the key and most critical question, because your your strategy must address, if we go back to the Porter theories, you need to look at, I'm not talking about internal auditors having competitors, but you need to understand who are the players, who are the group of people that you need to influence so that your internal audit function can be acceptable to the organization and can be perceived as a strategic partner. And so you also need to determine in your strategy now, what do you need to deliver? When should you deliver that? And how you need to deliver that? So I think this is just a preamble to talking about the strategy, but also, as I said, you need to define your stakeholders. So I believe if you're going to develop your internal audit strategy, one of your key stakeholders are your other internal auditors who are working in your department. So your strategy must also explain what is the need for them. Are you taking good care of your internal auditors? And we will come later on to discuss more in this area. So your strategy should address the internal perspective, but it should also address the external perspective. So with the internal perspective, look at your internal stakeholders, who mainly will be the internal audit staff. But from external audit perspective, you need to consider other stakeholders. So in terms of the board members, what would they need, to consume for the next 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years from internal auditing? How do they expect to see the involvement of internal auditing function? Senior management, the same. So I'm now in Uganda, so I've been doing a training here on risk management. But one of the things we've been discussing here with the participants in my class, I have asked them, when was the last time, for example, internal audit has been able to call a stakeholders forum and present the format of their reports and ask the audience and say, this is how we've been reporting things. We want us to improve. But most of the internal auditors, they looked at me suspiciously. And it's like, is this possible? Are we going to be objective when we do that? Are we going to be independent, when we are receiving this kind of feedback, etc.? What I said is the final decision is yours in terms of how you are going to put the format of your reports. But it's quite important to understand these reports is a tool that you are using to communicate to your other stakeholders. So these stakeholders who are consuming these products, what are they expecting from internal auditing? So based on this could be their feedback, for example, that is in a simple example, could be an input in terms of how does internal auditing is going to evolve in the next 3 years. So when I was in the international conference this year, I was attending a CAI, Chief Audit Executive track, because nowadays we have a specific track for Chief Audit Executives. And people were talking about one-page report, that internal auditors should produce a one-page report. And they had their reasons and basis for argument. But then most of internal audit shops are still producing 50 pages with the annexure that can go even to 100 pages. So I'm not expecting that internal auditors will be able to transform within a period of 12 months and start producing maybe a 1-page, 2-page, or 3 pages report. But then the question will be, how do you expect to evolve over the next 3 years in terms of how you produce your reports, in terms of how do you engage with your stakeholders, in terms of other aspects which you want internal audit staff also to grow? Because all these changes, they also involve you taking care of the people that you have in your organization. But also, one of the things which also triggers or will be an important input to your strategy, internal audit strategy, which is standard number 9, is the current demand in the internal audit professional. Yeah. So if we, in terms of the assurance part, with these new standards come, there was a Vision 2035 report, which was done by the IIA Global, and it shows that there's a need between now and in the next 10 years, let's say by 2025, for internal auditors to move or to shift their perceptions to become strategic advisors and catalysts for change. So for that to happen, it's not going to be an accident. It has to be planned. And you can't plan this in the routine work that you are doing. It has to be factored into your internal audit strategic plan in terms of how are you going to shift the mindset of the internal auditors in your team. How are you going to shift the way you've been communicating to your stakeholders, the way you've been engaging to them, and the way you've been sharing whatever information so that you can achieve the standards that you want to achieve come, let's say, 3 years from now. So the way I look at it with this new internal audit strategy, okay, the standard is not very prescriptive, but I believe we would look into more or less like a maturity model in terms of this is where we are, this is where we want to be, and this is how we're going to get there. So that is your strategy, because you have to start with looking at where you are now, looking at where you want to be, and then you have to look at in between here. If it's going to be 2 years, if it's going to be 3 years span, so what are you going to do now to move from state number 1 to state number 2? As we move along, part of the challenges that internal auditors are facing, and as I said, which I believe it's quite important, and it's a part of the reasons why this new standard was introduced, is the fact that most of us, we feel we are misunderstood. We feel that we are undervalued, or maybe 60 years. Why are we still misunderstood? So maybe we've been operating on ad hoc basis, but we didn't take time to consider that the people who are consuming our services, what do they expect from us? What do they want from us? Or maybe we've been operating on short-termism without looking at the long-term picture of where do we want our profession to be? Where do we want our department of internal audit in organization A or in organization B to be? So part of being misunderstood or undervalued could be contributed to that. But also, there's also a point which is talking about the need for more support from leaders and the stakeholders. And I believe the best way, we used to present internal audit plan for 1 year to the audit committee, to senior management, we get their input, but now we have an opportunity to tell them not only what we are going to do in 1 year, but what we are intending to do in the next 3 years or in the next 5 years to support the organization strategy. So I believe this internal audit strategy will not be in isolation to the organization strategy. So your strategy should be built in such a way that it is talking to the organization strategy. So your internal audit function should also be transforming at the same rate which the organization is transforming, or you should be 5 steps ahead of them. But it is not allowed for your transformation to be slower than how the organization is transforming. And I think part of the problems that we are having now is the fact that internal auditing is transforming at the pace of the snail, while the organization is transforming at a very high speed. So that creates a gap between us. So this is an opportunity now to bridge that gap so that we can move together with the organization. But there's also issues of that we are lacking the skill set within the internal audit function. Okay, so when we talk about the skill set within the internal audit function, if we are lacking them, it is our opportunity through this internal audit strategy to decide how are we going to bridge that gap of skill. So even if we are sitting together today with management, they are not happy about what we are doing, they are not happy with the quality of the people we have in internal auditing, this is an opportunity for us to say, we understand you are not happy with what we have, but this is our plan for the next 5 years. So the number of people, let's say, will increase from here to here, but these are the cause, short-term cause, long-term cause, etc., on how things are going to be done. As I said, the expectations of the stakeholders on our professional, on internal auditing, has been keeping on increasing. We've been asking for a seat at the table for a long time. So we've been given that seat at the table, but probably we've been given seat, but when the dinner is eaten and people are contributing to the conversation, internal auditors are quiet throughout the conversation. So it's time now to be sitting at that table and also being able to contribute the same way other people are contributing in that conversation. As we move along, I want to go, and so as I said, how do we fix the gaps between what our stakeholders are expecting from us and what we are delivering now as internal auditors? I believe the quickest way we can fix this is through the development of internal audit strategic plan. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about this other aspect on how you're going to shift from being perceived as a police or something like that, but I want us to move to the standard, so that we can get in there and so that I can also allow more time for discussion and conversation, and also to give my colleague Godfrey an opportunity also to complement this in this conversation. So one of the reasons that were given by the IIA when they released these new standards is the issue of raising the bar for quality internal auditing. I expect that our internal audit strategy should address the matter of how are we going to raise that bar from our internal audit department of organization X. Yeah, so if it is Kepler, then the internal audit department at Kepler should show through its internal audit strategic plan, which should be aligned to the whole organization plan on how are they going to elevate that bar and how are they going to contribute. So I think this is very important. So as we move along, we have, in the new standards, we have 5 domains, 15 principles, 52 standards. So these standards, they give you requirements, they give you considerations for implementations, and also they provide examples of evidence of conformance. Of course, there are other developments. I believe there's the issue of topical requirements, which have been developed. Cyber probably has been released maybe by this time. I'm not very certain, but there are other developments which are going on right now in terms of documents to support the implementation of some of these standards. Okay, so as we move along, today our focus is going to be on only one area of these 5 domains. So these 5 domains, they have the purpose of internal auditing. Okay, so that's domain number 1. We have ethics and professionalism, which is number 2. Governing the internal audit function, number 3, and managing the internal audit function is number 4, and number 5 is performing the internal audit services. Out of these 5 domains, there are 15 principles. Okay, so in those 15 principles, number 1 is talking about the purpose of internal auditing. And I think, this is a shifty, it's a significant transformation. Previously we started with the definition of internal auditing, but here the focus here is, why do we exist? So I believe also when you are developing your strategic plan is an opportunity also to clearly articulate the purpose of internal audit function. So that should be in your preamble of the strategic plan. Maybe I believe you will do your SWOT analysis, you will do your political, environmental, and then we'll move to ethics and professionalism. So this content is also familiar with you, which talks about how do we demonstrate integrity, how do we maintain objectivity, demonstrate competency, exercise due professional care, and maintain confidentiality. So domain 3 is going to talk about governing the internal audit function. And I hope the IIA will arrange another seminar to specifically discuss, another domain. But for now, I believe in this series, our focus today is managing the internal audit function under domain 4, which is we are discussing the principle number 9, plan strategically. So I think that's our focus for today. My conversation has been built around that area. So we won't talk about how do you manage resources, how do you communicate effectively, how do you enhance quality, but I believe your strategic plan, your internal audit strategic plan, is so crucial that it addresses all these issues actually in domain number 4. I would not understand how would you develop an internal audit strategic plan which do not discuss about how are you going to manage resources appropriately. And here I'm not talking about how do you going to manage resources on engagement level, but over a longer period of time, what's your plan for resource management? So the resources can be people, can be time, can be technology, as well. So now we are talking about ChatGPT, getting more advanced and more advanced, so it's part of the resources that are available to you, are going to be available to you. How is AI, artificial intelligence, going to impact the work of internal auditing? Do you factor adopting or considering using this within your strategic plan, maybe within a year, within 2 years, or within 3 years? Okay. Do you want to automate completely the reporting aspect or the communication aspect using the support of artificial intelligence and other available technologies? Okay. So that I believe should be factored somewhere in your strategic plan. So which addresses also the issue of communicating effectively. Because your plan also needs to understand in the long term, as I said earlier, what are the expectations of your stakeholders? What do they need to consume? You don't produce reports that you love yourself, but you need to produce reports which have impacts. So I believe over a longer period of time, you should factor away on how you're going to collect feedback from time to time, on how, so that you can improve your communication, you can change different means of communication. Recently, I was listening to one of my colleagues, and he's based in Germany, but he was talking about how now they are using sort of a podcast to communicate, so which means the reports have moved to verbal communication. So you finish your audit work and you record a podcast of 1 hour to talk about the reports. And so you send it to management so they can listen. Instead of reading the paper, they listen as you are listening now, the way I present. So that's how they are evolving their communication. So I believe also in your functions, based on your stakeholders' needs, not expecting all audit functions to change in the same direction, but based on the requirements of your stakeholders and based on your understanding of your stakeholders, maybe you may need also to find ways of how you're going to evolve. But also there are stakeholders who are consuming the paper reports. So those will continue to receive. So in other words, over a longer period of time, in terms of the communication, you never know, your strategic plan would include that internal audit. You can develop this podcast that can communicate key audit issues. You can still have some newsletters that can communicate within the organization on how we want to transform and impact the organization. But you can also continue to issue maybe a 2-page report, to senior management and the board, and maybe 10-page report in whatever process that you audit. Then this is the limit. Everything we're going to squeeze into this size. This is how we're going to communicate, because as we move forward, communications are required to be more concise, more clear. And I think in the standards, one of the areas that have not changed from previous IPPF to now is the issue of the quality of communication. That clarity, that conciseness, that straight to the point is still documented in this new standard as it was documented in the previous standards. So as we talk about planning strategically, and I believe I've spent about 30 minutes already right now, let's move on further and talk about, so this is now principle number 9, which it says the chief audit executive plans strategically to position the internal audit function to fulfill its mandate and achieve long-term success. No? So I think the key word here is long-term success. Long-term success is very important. Most of the things that we've been doing, they have been the short-term things. So we've been focusing more internal auditing on short-term goals. That's why we've been doing annual plan, which is only lasting after 1 year. And then next year, you are doing a completely new plan, which probably it has no relationship with the previous plan. But maybe based on the way we are moving now, things will be changing. So this is standard, this principle, number 9, it requires you as the chief audit executive to plan strategically, to position, that's another key word, to position the internal audit function to fulfill its mandate, of course, and achieve long-term success. So strategies are developed to win. So in other words, this principle requires you to position internal audit function to be able to win. Because what's the root cause of this? Some of the studies that were done by the IIA were showing that internal auditing is one of the professionals that was declining. So I'm going to speak with a little bit lower voice. And so part of why all these studies came, why the standards have been reviewing, why we look at position of internal auditors is because we want to put the internal audit professional where it belongs. So to put the internal audit professional where it belongs, it's not the responsibility of only the IIA as the organization. It is also the responsibility of each and every member of the Institute of Internal Auditors, each and every chief audit executive, each and every internal auditors. So we all have a responsibility to position the internal audit function to fulfill its mandate. I think that's the spirit behind this number 9 principle. And it talks about 9.1 is talking about understanding governance, risk management, and control process. I think this is not something new. You've been doing this because part of previously, I think standard 2100, it was talking about the same thing. Okay, so this is not something new. But what is new here is internal audit strategy, which is 9.2. And I want to borrow, if you give me a minute, I want to open specifically on section 9.2, which is on page 363 on these new standards, okay, which you can get your copy online. I believe it's free to get it online. But if you love hard copies, they are available for purchase. And for those who are in Tanzania, I believe the IIA has enough copies to the members. Okay, so principle number 9, plan strategically. It says the chief audit executive will plan strategically to position the internal audit function to fulfill its mandate and achieve long-term success. That is what you see on the slide. So it goes further to say planning strategically requires the chief audit executive to understand the internal audit mandate and the organization governance, risk management, and control processes. To develop internal audit standard strategy in 9.2, it requires you to understand 9.1, okay, according to this explanation here. A properly resourced and positioned internal audit function develops and implements a strategy to support the organization's success. So now talks about the issue of resources. And it goes further to say, in addition, the chief audit executive creates and implements methodologies to guide the internal audit function and develop the internal audit plan. So as you can see, these methodologies that are being listed here, they are part of your long-term strategic plan. So how is your methodology of internal audit going to evolve? And then it will impact also your annual internal audit plan. So your annual internal audit plan will be aligned to the long-term internal audit strategic plan. So I think, and then the final sentence here, it says, in addition, the chief audit executive creates and implement methodologies to guide the internal audit function and develop the internal audit plan. So it goes on to talk about the requirements. So it says to develop an effective internal audit strategy and plan, the chief audit executive must understand the organization governance, risk management, and the control processes. But this is the final part that I'm going to read. And it says to understand governance processes, the chief audit executive must consider how the organization establishes strategic objectives and makes strategic and operational decisions. So in other words, you must understand the organization strategy, but you also must understand how organization oversee risk management and control, how they promote an ethical culture, how do they deliver effective performance management and accountability. So there's an issue of measurements here, KPIs, key performance indicators. So you need also to understand the key performance indicators of the organization, but you also need to build in key performance indicators for internal audit strategy, because your strategy must also be measurable. And then it talks about structures, its management and operating functions. It talks about communications and the coordination of work. So there are many other aspects which have been listed, but I'm not going to spend time. I'm encouraging you to go and get time to go through that on your own. And I would like to move on to the next slide and pause a little bit and look at strategy in general. Okay, so when I was doing this presentation, I had to think about, how do you position? Because there's a word of positioning in internal auditing. So I had to borrow these materials from the Porter's strategy book. So according to Porter, when you talk about strategic position, there are 6 principles of strategic position. So I believe these are not written in your internal audit standards. They are not written in your IPPF, but you need to understand them, because when we talk about positioning, this is how you need to position internal auditing. Yeah. So first of all, you need to start with the right goal. So what is the right goal? So the right goal, as I said in the beginning, in my view, you have a spectrum that you are operating. So you are in the beginning, let's say you are in stage 1, the best place you can be in stage 5. In between, there's stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. Then there's a roadmap on how you're going to move from stage 1 to stage 2, to stage 3, to stage 4. So in an ideal situation, the superior goal will be for you to move from stage 1 to stage 5. Although in practice, that is not going to happen easily. So you need to think about, yes, this is a long term. Maybe you need to move to this superior goal by the end of the 5th year. But in between, what are you going to do? What are the minimum small steps that you have to take for you to attain your superior long-term goal? And when we talk here about long-term return on investment for internal auditing, is for your function to be considered as a strategic advisor. You are adding value to your organization. But you must also find a strategy that must enable a differentiated value proposition. What do you bring at the table as internal auditing? What I said, I think I was talking to another group, and I believe it was yesterday, and I said, in some organizations, sitting at the board, I also sit at the board. I'm chairing 3 actually, audit and risk committees. Yeah, so where we are sitting, you are receiving reports from internal control function, you are receiving reports from compliance function, you are receiving report from risk functions. They are all coming to audit and risk committee. And then you are receiving reports from internal audit function. So you have an opportunity to compare all of these and see which one is adding more value. Yeah. So this is where it becomes very important for us to find how do we differentiate ourselves, as strategic advisors, as internal auditing. Because otherwise, if that value cannot be seen, then you can disappear. And people will not see the arm of why you have disappeared. And this is why sometimes you would cause the board to start thinking like, why don't we merge internal audit and control functioning and risk management function? Because they don't really feel there's anything different that you are bringing in. So my brothers and sisters, and as we are discussing today, you have to think, what is it differently that you are going to offer on the table as an internal audit function where you are today? And that's something, that unique value proposition that you're going to offer should not be the same as the one that compliance function is offering or what risk is offering. You have to give a superior. So that's something that you need to consider. So again, as you say, the strategy needs to be reflected in a distinctive value chain. So you're not going to be in isolation. So look at a longer term plan, look at a big picture also on how you are going to clearly articulate your strategy to show how you're going to contribute to the long-term value creation of the organization. So it's not about we, internal audit, we will do this, we will do that, we will do that. You should also say, what are you going to do for the organization? So it's not about what the organization will do for you, but also what you will do for them. How will you contribute to increase of profitability to the organization, to increase in the customer base for the organization? So how are you going to contribute to that? So that's something else that you need to consider. But strategy is also a good strategy. It involves what is called the trade-offs. So with the trade-offs, you have to make decisions about what you can do and what you cannot do. What you cannot do is also as extremely important as what you can do. As internal auditing, I believe it's not that we can do everything. We have to decide based on the mandate and scope of internal auditing, what are the areas that we need to focus. And sometimes in a lifespan of 3 years or 5 years, you may not be able to achieve everything. So your strategy should be broken into phases based on what you want to achieve. We no longer do 5-year strategic plan nowadays because 5 years is just too long. So maybe most of the strategic plan, they are 3 years, and they are very agile. They keep on changing from time to time. No one is doing 10 years strategic planning nowadays, but we need to look at what are the trade-offs. What should we need to do it in the first 3 years? And what do we need to do maybe in the second 3 years? But if we want to do all things together as of now, then you don't have a strategy. You're just doing everything, and doing everything is not a strategy. Okay. Again, we need to define how all elements of the company, they are fitting it together. Again, all the components of whatever strategy that you're going to develop, and we'll see shortly, must fit in together. They should talk to each other and contribute to your superior value that you want to achieve, to the long-term value that internal audit needs to achieve. And also, finally, as I said, there must be that continuity. So it's not like you have done today, 3 years strategy is over. Then after that, a completely new strategy will come in the next year. As I said, you may have goals that you want to achieve in a long term for 10 years, but you need to break them into shorter periods. But these shorter periods, they may need to have some sort of continuity from first strategy to the second strategy, and so on and so forth. I think this is an important aspect which you should consider as you are considering your strategic plan. This is an example from one of the documents that was published recently by the IIA. So when we talk about internal audit strategy, we should consider strategy that is going to be measurable, but we should also clearly articulate the objectives. So for simplicity, this is a sample standard. This is a sample on how you're going to structure your internal audit strategy. As I said in the beginning of my presentation, if you've heard me correctly, you need to understand your stakeholders. And I said the first group of people that you have to deal with, if you are a chief audit executive, and here I'm talking to chief audit executive because the principle number 9 is directing them, the chief audit executive. So you as a chief audit executive, you need to know how are you going to deal with the talents, with these internal auditors within your department. That's the first component that you have to address. So there's an issue of independence and objectivity, proficiency and professionalism, the talent source for organization. So how do you want to position internal auditing? You know, in some places, internal auditing is considered as a pool of talent, but any good garden must be watered. I have done a lot of gardening work back in the years, and one of the things that I used to enjoy is when if you put fertilizers and then there's enough water and the season goes well, you will enjoy to see that fruits. And I was doing gardening for vegetables mostly, but so they look good. You enjoy the labor of your hands. So it's the same thing with these talents. Your internal audit function cannot be a source of talent if it is not being watered appropriately, if you don't add fertilizers. So how these fertilizers and water are being done, this is now, I believe in your internal audit strategic planning, you must have a very clear database of the resources that you have in terms of humans. So how many people do I have? 5. You need to understand their competences, their skills, their education, their needs, and their needs both in terms of technical competency, also other social issues. So I will talk about that because some other time, I believe time may not be enough for now, but if you have internal auditors who are very young in your department, they may have different social needs as well, apart from the technical things that they do for you. So you as a good leader, you need to understand how you can cultivate that and align well so that your plan is also linked with their goals, you know, so that they can move together. Yeah, so you need to develop your talent base. You need to develop their training plans for short term and for long term as well. But you also may need to provide other advices to the team. How are you going to raise their proficiency and their professionalism, their objectivity? You know, how are you going to ensure that your department is independent, and independence in both aspects, in terms of how it is perceived by other people and how it is documented? Because we have internal audit functions which in documentations, they are considered as they are independent, but the perception of the people, they see internal auditors as puppets of the bosses because they do what they are being told to do. They are just chasing opportunities left, right, and center. They don't have focus. So there are some of those auditors as well. So that's not what we're talking about. We should talk about how are you going to be an independent and objective strategic advisor. So here, the issue of compensation also will come. So the issue of compensation of your team also. You see, in my experience, I have seen people, the chief audit executives, who's once they are receiving the 7-figure salaries, they don't care very much how the other members of their team are being compensated. But a good leader would not be happy to receive a big bonus and big salary when everyone else in your department is suffering. So that should be factored within your internal strategic planning. You should factor, there's a lot of other information that there's benchmarking information. You should be getting salaries information about how our internal auditors in the market generally are compensated. You compare, you create a gap analysis as an input to your strategy to show that our internal auditors are compensated at this level. The market, the industry average is this level. So how do we bridge this gap? Definitely an organization cannot move you from this salary to this salary immediately, but you should create a long-term plan in consultation with management on how you're going to move the compensation of internal auditors as well to align at least with an industry average, you know, because that is important in terms of the talent, having a workforce that is motivated and they can deliver the work. Here, the measures that you see here, these are few measures. You know, I believe I've discussed more issues here. You know, so here, there's an issue of staff retention. So staff retention is what I've been discussing here. Retention of staff can be contributed by so many factors. It's not all about the money, but people have to be happy. They have to be seen as they are valued. So how do you create that happiness around internal audit function? should be part of your internal strategic plan. Yeah, but how many CIAs do you have in your department? How many CISA, how many certified fraud examiners do you have in your team? You know, that should be part of your long term. You don't do training because there's money, there's budget for training. So which training are we sending someone this time around? That's not how we operate. We should clearly know what are the gaps of our people, what short-term training we need to offer them, what long-term training we need to offer them, what are the CPEs opportunities that they have to do to maintain, like CPAs, ACCA, CIA. So they have to attend conference, they have to attend seminars, etc. And then we move to the process of internal auditing. How do we want to see the process of internal auditing evolve over a period of time? You know, in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years. And I am certain, as I am speaking now, we have internal auditors whose their process have not evolved for the last 5 years. They are here, they are listening. And I want to remind you today, you have to change. This is a good opportunity now for you to change using this internal audit strategy. Okay, so you need to look at how you can continuously improve your process. One of the things that I said, when I do a presentation, if I do it today, the same presentation, if I do it next week, there's no chance, there's absolutely no chance that I'm going to repeat using the same slides that I've used today to do a presentation next week. I will modify whether it is 1, 2, or 3 slides. Why? Because every time I do a presentation, I see gaps. You know, when I'm presenting, I feel like, no, I didn't do well here. This was not a good area. How can I improve this? It's the same thing with the process. It's the same thing with the report. The Kaizen, the Japanese, theory for continuous improvement is important to be adopted. So you need to have measures in terms of the process. And I'm going to wind up quickly to return, because I've spent 1 hour to return to Godfrey, at least to have 20, 25 minutes to engage with the audience. So we have measures. So the key message here is whatever strategic plan that you are developing, it should have measures. The measures could be like post-engagement feedback. You complete engagement, you've sent some surveys, some questionnaires. What feedback did you receive? Receiving feedback is not good enough. What are you doing with the feedback? Yeah? Do you accept the feedback? I was talking to somebody recently, and they asked me for feedback. I provided them with the feedback. Then they started to say, but, and then I said, no, I do not need your explanation. You asked me to give you the feedback. This is the feedback that I've given you. I don't want you to defend yourself. You just go and think. If it makes sense to you, work on it. If it doesn't, it's okay. But when you start now being too much defensive, you're not going to accept the feedback, you know. So it's important when these people are filling in the questionnaires, they're giving you feedback, accept, and then you'll get time to analyze whether that feedback is valid or not. So here, your strategy should cover talent, it should cover process, it should cover technology as well. So as I said in the beginning, I think I've already addressed the issue of technology. How is ChatGPT going to impact you? How data analytics is going to impact you? Yes, as of today, you are doing auditing manually. You do not even have data analytics software. So what are you going to do in the next 3 years? So you should clearly identify, if you want by the end of the 3rd year to be a functional, that is full-fledged using predictive analytics, etc., you should plan in the year 1. What kind of skills do you need to bring on board? What kind of training and development you need to do? Because you don't do miracle by just getting someone today and then in the next 3 months, you want these people to be performing. So you need to plan for longer term. Maybe they will start with the basics and then they can continue to build on. But also the training must be aligned to develop them to reach that level that you're requiring. You won't train them only once and then the training stops, you know, so it means that they need to be empowered more, you know. So you need to consider that aspect. I have already spoken, I believe, in the beginning on how we want you to be a strategic advisor. So I said you need to think about that superior goal, you know, according to Porter's on strategic positioning. So for long-term investment. So the strategic positioning that I was talking about here is we want you to move to this strategic advisor, to become strategic partner, risk advisor, catalyst for change. But what do you do and how do you do that? So you need to address your coverage of internal auditing as well. So if you remember on the principle number 9, it was talking about to be able to do that, you need to understand risk management, governance, and internal control. So how many times have you addressed these 3 areas in your audit scope? If not, how are you building internal capabilities to be able to address these things? You know, I'm doing risk management here, and every time I do risk management, I continue to learn. You know, like today, I think I have found some completely new things. I was teaching, and they come, you know, and I look at them and I feel like, wow, risk management is beautiful. But the way we're doing it, we feel that risk management is only for me as an internal auditor. I just need to see they have risk register, they have risk management framework or policy. That's it. But risk management is more than that. So to be able to become strategic advisor, strategic partner as an internal auditor, this is an area that we have to excel because it is mandatory for us. Internal control, most of us, we manage it very well. But the governance and risk management components, those things should be built in your plan on how you're going to build the capacity of internal auditors in risk management. Because even if you do your certification for CIA, it may not be enough to give you that proficiency on the area of risk management. So you should also think about what other certifications and training you need to give to internal auditors to be able to achieve that level. You know, so ladies and gentlemen, because I think I talk and I can continue to talk over and over, I believe it's time now I should give an opportunity to the moderator, Mr. Godfrey. I believe you have about 25 minutes to moderate this conversation, and feel free to address any of the questions or any of the comments that are coming from the audience. So thank you, and Godfrey, over to you.
Thank you very much, EJ, for such a wonderful presentation. And I think this really cracks the matters which we started earlier on. And I think the key message that are coming from the presentation, I think now is high time for us to connect it to the strategy that our organization really are working on. And if we didn't get involved in the preparation of strategy, this is actually the time that we're getting closer to it, to do kind of an assessment, evaluation, and see where we can actually fit in as we're developing our bigger strategy in internal auditing for the next 3 or 5 years. That is the fundamental number 1. Again, what you have tried to respond on the basis of what I started earlier on, the talent management now is becoming a critical matter as we are developing our strategy. Certainly, the diversity, the quality of the people that we need to have in the external auditor in the next 5 years will substantially shift for us really to be able to be of value add to our organization. I think the last one is what you just alluded, the major assurance transformations that we needed to undergo. And technology is something that we all needed to embark on quickly. And this really is not something of choice anymore. We have to be there and we must be ahead of the game if we really were to be seen like we're people that we are going to support organization in terms of the long-term success. Having said that, members, may I now come back to you very humbly and ask if any of you have any kind of question, you can just come louder and we'll give you an opportunity to do that. You're welcome.
So as we listing the comments, okay, so I would like to acknowledge the comments in the chat box. So somebody is asking, how different is the internal audit strategy and the internal audit strategic work plan? I think Godfrey, can you help me address that question? It's coming from Gideon Asante. He's asking the difference between internal audit strategy and the internal audit strategic work plan.
Yeah, actually, thank you. Yeah, I did actually went directly to him. I think I made it very clear that it's all depending in terms of the scope and how, that strategy fits in the bigger picture of the organization. If it's completely different, then it becomes like a programming of what you intended to do. But if it's something that fits in very well within the bigger picture of the organization, then yes, it can actually be what we refer as a strategic plan. So the work plan, really, to me, I consider it more for a programming or rather actualizations of the strategy. rather than having kind of a major roadmap or things that you want to achieve over a period, say, of 3 to 5 years.
Yes, I think that clarity is very important in the question, that because if you go back here, it says the chief audit executive plans strategically to position internal auditing. So here we talk about internal audit strategy. So the strategy that we talk here, and according to the standards, it's been referred as a long-term thing. So it is not the internal audit strategy, the way we look to address a certain engagement on how we are planning to do procurement auditing, as a short-term assignment on our strategy for that one. So I think there's some terminologies that may interfere with each other, but here, for clarity, what we are referring here is a long-term thing, long-term thinking of how you're gonna position internal auditing function to deliver its mandate. I think that's what we mean by that. So, but again, you can continue to ask if there's you need more clarity.
Is there anybody
Yes.
that with the comment? I think one fundamental issue, EJ, which is important that members needed to take this opportunity between now and January, is really to embark on the current strategies that organizations have gotten, because that will provide a valuable kind of an initial assessment and really kind of make yourself kind of candid feedback whether or not you are able to fit in that bigger strategy. The danger is if you are not doing it now and wait it until we get in January, probably that will be very, very late. So my suggestion to internal practitioners in this part of the world is for you now to embark on actually doing an assessment of the strategy, see whether you have got any opportunity for you really to start some very specific initiatives that you can build in your bigger planning, say in the next 4, 5, 3 years ahead of your time. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a question from Irene Mbilinia. If the company has 5 years strategic plan, can the internal audit strategy be one of the shorter tenure, say 3 years? Are we not supposed to match the two?
I did respond again directly to her, and I said normally it's good to pitch in on the same time horizon, because that is how you can actually size up your opportunities, your gaps analysis, so that you can see how you fit in very well in terms of supporting delivery of that kind of long-term strategy. I think the important point here, our members, they should understand our objective, our strategy must fit in the bigger strategy. And if there are any shortcoming of the bigger strategy of the organization, we needed to come in and probably provide a directive and our thought process. And that is what really the standard is looking for. We can't just sit back and relax and expect that the strategy organization have really is fit for the long-term success. We have an opportunity this time around to challenge even the strategy that organization have. And I think in that process, yes, it may be difficult conversations, but we have at least now kind of an opportunity to pitch in and validate what kind of strategy the organization have gotten. Thank you.
I would like to give Mr. Chacha, I had Chacha an opportunity. If you are still online, I think you've put some interesting comment on how you're using balanced scorecard to develop your strategy. So you are ahead of time. So can you share in a nutshell? I believe you can get about 5 minutes to, like how do you do it? I think your experience is important.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I wanted to share my experience of developing the strategy using balanced scorecard. With balanced scorecard, actually, the emphasis is to cascade the tier 1 strategy, the organization-wide strategy to a department level. And the idea is that your strategy, the internal audit strategy, is designed to assist achievement of the entity-wide strategy. And therefore, it starts with all these high-level strategies like the vision and mission, but also you put it very well. You need to define your stakeholders. And in our case, we categorized them into 2, our primary stakeholders and our secondary stakeholders. And in the public sector, for instance, we We have internal and external. External meaning that you look for those who come from outside the organization and those who are internal to the organization. And under each category of stakeholders, you need to define the value that you want to deliver to them. And it's an exercise that you need to involve them so that they can explain to you what value they expect from you. And when you develop your strategies and initiatives, you can easily meet their expectations. But another element that you get from Balanced Scorecard are the strategic themes. These are broad goals that there are few, a maximum of 4, that you pursue during the corporate plan period. For instance, in our case, we had operational excellence, we had technological or innovation excellence, and we had business acumen, to mention a few. The idea is you develop your initiatives, your strategies, your objectives to help you achieve those broader goals that will actually help you push forward the agenda of the organization at large. So maybe that is what I can explain in a very short way, but maybe sometimes I'll get time to elaborate further on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chacha. And I think probably you should run the next, in consultation with the leadership of IIA Tanzania and AFIA. You should do the next webinar as a continuation of this to put this now into practice using the case study of how you've developed yours using the Balanced Scorecard. But what is coming here, which is very important, is how internal auditors are required to be multi-skilled. When you are doing CIA exams, I believe in part 3, under the current syllabus, which is not going to change anyway. Yeah, I mean, the syllabus for part 3 exam is going to remain the same, but only the questions on how they are asked is going to change. So even with the new syllabus, business acumen will be there. Yeah. So this business acumen, it requires you to understand things like, balance scorecard and other things. So I believe this knowledge is quite important for internal auditors as you move along and develop your internal audit strategy. Okay. So Chacha, as I said, maybe further consultation will be done, but I want to go online and take quickly the comments that are available here and address any question that is remaining pending. I saw the question somewhere, but on the comment on Irene, I know it's good to align 5 to 5, but from my perspective, I mean, Godfrey, I know he has responded to the question, but from my perspective, I do not see the harm if internal auditing, you can develop the 3-year plan, but it is not outside the bigger goals that have been put for the 5 years plan of the organization. Because as I said, the important thing is to have the continuity in your strategy. So you can do the 3-year and 3 years. So by the end of the 5th year, you will be aligned completely with the organization, but you just want to break yours into smaller, more achievable, easier to manage things, and also more agile. So that would be my perspective. But again, as I said, Godfrey response is also good because it's the easiest one if you align the two. But if you can split as well, it depends on how you want to deal with it. Okay, so the next question. Okay, there's one question from Boston Simfukwe. It says, to what extent should the strategic plan be included in the internal audit charter?
Yeah, that is actually one of the things. If you look at the recent global internal audit standard, the domain number 1 goes concurrently with the domain number 1. And if you look at the domain number 1, you really recognize that your mandate needed really to be defined in the context of the bigger things that the new standard is looking for. So it is important that when you're actually putting you are reviewing your internal audit charter, some of the things that you need really to bring out now is to demand for clear mandate for you to do some of the things that the new or currently or proposed new standard come into effect next year is populating. So I encourage people to revisit their kind of mandate and charter and see whether there are any opportunities to bring some of these new requirements so that you can actually get the board now more involved in terms of providing oversight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Godfrey, I should give you an opportunity to conclude this conversation. So we have about 9 minutes. So in 5 minutes, Godfrey, you can give your remarks to sum up this presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much, members. Firstly, on behalf of the Institute of Internal Auditors Tanzania, I must say thank you very much for members all over Africa for joining this webinar. This is the kind of trying to bring perspective and probably to share with you some of the challenges that you may face next year in your journey to implement the global internal audit standard. This is just the beginning, but I think as we are developing this strategy, we'll probably sometime February next year or March, we can have kind of a webinar to reflect and probably identify some of the challenges, which some of them I alluded earlier on, and to see whether we have gotten kind of remediations and be able to find our way out. As I said earlier, there are some organizations in the past have done this. I think Chacha probably is one of them. This wasn't the requirement of the standard, but people felt like they needed to do it. So we can still borrow some of those experiences and bring them on board. So I encourage you really to participate whenever we make these webinars available. And this is how we grow together in terms of sharing. Now, let me ask the IIA Tanzania administrators if they have any specific announcement.
And Godfrey,
yes.
Before you announce, I think there's a comment here. I think it's been well written here from Douglas Bashobeza. It talks about the key themes that they have been picked on the presentation on internal audit strategy. One is to diagnose your problem, what internal audit function need to address. Second, to define your field of play, okay, where and how. And third, what story you want to tell your stakeholders. And finally, action plan for execution. I think this is good comment, well noted from the summary of what we've covered. And back to you, Godfrey, as you said, to the leadership of IIA, if they have any announcements or any things that they want to proceed administratively. Thank you. And thank you very much, Godfrey, for moderating this session. I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to the administrators. If you have any announcements, otherwise you can give me a shout so that I can wind up.
Maybe on behalf of Secretariat, I see Safe is on mute, but as IIA Tanzania leadership, we thank you for your contribution in this discussion. I know it's one of the emerging, if not emerged, and this is a reality. So as IIA Tanzania, we are committed to serve our members and support you in navigating into the new standards 2024. So we have a full week training on the new standards. That's going to happen next week. And EJ, who was presenting the strategy, is one of the speakers or one of the facilitators. So we'll be having a masterclass on how to navigate through the 2024 Global Internal Audit Standards. So if we get also delegates from outside, we may consider opening it up for virtual platforms. So thank you everyone for attending and looking forward to see you in our future events. Over to you, Mr. Kilenga. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, the President of the IIA Tanzania. And again, I don't really have much to say, and I say goodbye to all members in Africa.